John Mitchell. Do you mind what? Just a second. It's never been told before. And I haven't asked John whether I can tell it. But he is too, I suppose, decent a man to ever tell it. You see, John's problem was not Watergate. It was Martha. And it's one of the personal tragedies of our time. I was the only one in the administration who knew, except for Rose Woods, my secretary, of the Martha problem. All the people in Washington who knew about the Martha problem knew that she was, an interesting person who'd make midnight telephone calls to Helen Thomas or somebody else and put out some tidbit of a story and raise hell about Fulbright or this or that or the other thing, and, good thing to yuck about. But in 1968, during the campaign, John had to send Martha away for about 5 or 6 weeks. I didn't know it at the time. She was an emotionally disturbed person. I asked John to come down to be Attorney General. I spent a day with him working on it. I didn't know why he wouldn't do it. As a matter of fact, he didn't even want to come down for the election night business and all that sort of thing. And he told me a little about Martha's problem, but only saying, she's not really up to it emotionally. I said, look, not being an amateur psychiatrist, we all are, aren't we? I said, if you move her to Washington, it may be better. And so he brought her to Washington. She was much better for a while. And then the midnight calls came and so forth and so on. And then came the campaign. And then it began to go up and up and up. I mean, the tempo of her calls, and she busted her hand through a window out here in California and all the rest, and said that she was going to blow the whistle on everybody, and that John was doing this and being made a scapegoat, or words to that effect. But we don't need to go into that. All right. This sets the stage for why I feel about John. I asked Bibi about it. Bibi Rebozo. John and Martha used to go down and stay with him on their vacations. And Bibi said, I talked to John about Martha. This was incidentally during the campaign, shortly before the election, when she was acting up a bit then. This is after he left the committee. And he said, John, and they'd had a couple of drinks, and John was talking a little freely to him. And he said, John, why don't you put her away like you did in '68? Bibi said, tears came into John's eyes, and he says, well, because I love her. Well, you can't fault a guy like that. Sure, great stone face. But he loved her. He knew she was emotionally disturbed. He knew it wasn't just the booze. Sometimes she could be this way with no drinks, and sometimes be perfect with a lot of drinks. And so I'll never forget the campaign. I called one day. I was very busy. It was toward the end of the campaign, September, October. Hadn't heard from John. Called to say, John, how's the campaign going? He sounded very depressed. He said, oh, the campaign's going great. And I thought, God, maybe he's depressed about a Watergate or something. No. Then I could hear on the phone somebody come into the room. He said, Mr. President, would you mind saying hello to my girl? I said, sure. I thought he meant Marnie. That's his daughter. Sweet, lovely girl. And he adores her. I said, sure. Martha came on the phone. Her voice, and you know, she can be just as charming, wonderful when she talks. She says, Mr. President, I just want you to know that there are only 3 men in the world I love. I love John, I love Bibi, and I love you. The next night, she was on the phone at midnight, raising hell about everything. Okay, we come to the Watergate period. When the Watergate had already happened by that time, we're coming down to the period when the axe is going to fall on John. And I must say I made some statements then when Dean came in and said, you know, draw the wagons up around the White House. Mitchell is the guy, and Haldeman and Ehrlichman wanted to put it on Mitchell and all the rest. And I said, well, it must look that way to me, and indict him. And I said, it'll be a hell of a tough couple of weeks and all that sort of thing, but that's the way we have to go. This is in April.
Oh, Debs.
And then, but that they'd want more. Because I knew they'd want more. Somebody said it was an hors d'oeuvre. I said, oh no, they won't stop at Mitchell. They'll want more. Just as I told Ray Price when Haldeman and Ehrlichman went, he says, you know, when Haldeman and Ehrlichman leave, this was on April 29th, he says, that'll be enough for him. I said, no, Ray. You know writing, but you don't know politics. They're just going to raise the ante. But I understood it. I didn't like it. But in any event, here's Martha in this period. Here's John. I knew that he was strong. He never lets his emotions show, except he does have a quiver in his hand at times. It's better now, I understand. But I just didn't know what was going to break the man or her. I didn't know how bad the situation was. I've talked too long about it, but just let me just summarize it by saying, I'm convinced if it hadn't been for Martha, and God rest her soul, because she in her heart was a good person. She just had a mental and emotional problem that nobody knew about. If it hadn't been for Martha, there'd have been no Watergate. Because John wasn't minding that store. He was practically out of his mind about Martha in the spring of 1972. He was letting Ruder and all these boys, these kids, these nuts, run this thing. The point of the matter is that if John had been watching that store, Watergate would never have happened. Now, am I saying here at this late juncture that Watergate should be blamed on Martha Mitchell? Of course not. It might have happened anyway. Other things might have brought it on. Who knows? I do say this. I'm trying to explain my feeling of compassion for my friend John Mitchell. John Mitchell is a smart man. He's smart to ever get involved in a stupid jackass thing like Watergate. And John Mitchell also knew. He was smart enough to know the dangers of cover-ups and that sort of thing. But on the other hand, John Mitchell could only think of that Martha and love child Marnie. And so that's the human side of this story, which I know that you and the press, you can't be interested in that. You can only be interested in who shot John. Well, go ahead.